Hello, 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 and welcome back to Bold Strokes Books Bookathon. We're all very sad that this is the last session of our Bookathon. Thank you for being here. We so appreciate our readers. This session is writing during the pandemic, very timely, and we have our amazing captain, Radclyffe, to moderate this panel. I'm sure you guys already know this, but they pay me to say it. So 2 quick things about Zoom. There's a gallery view at the top right corner of your screen that will allow you to see panelists in the best view. There's a Q&A panel at the bottom. That is where you will put your questions for our panelists. There's a chat roll. You can post your comments and your commentary in there. So questions go in the Q&A, and any commentary or compliments go in the chat roll. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Radclyffe. Thanks.
Thanks, Sandy. Hello, everyone. For those of you who have been here on and off all weekend, thank you so much for coming and supporting us. And if this is your first one, you're making it to the best one. We are going to be talking about writing during the pandemic tonight. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and I will kick things off with a question for all of them. If you have questions, start putting them in the Q&A box, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen, and I will scan them as we go along so I can kind of keep up. Try not to put them in the chat because that one's hard to follow. So let me introduce our panelists in no particular order, but hopefully you can see all their names and you'll know who they are. First up, of course, is the inestimable Greg Herren. In addition to many other award-winning titles, Greg has titled over 20 works with BSB, including young adult short story collections, 3 anthologies edited with J.M. Redmann, who is also on the panel, and 2 mystery series, the most recent being Royal Street Rebellion, a Scotty Bradley mystery, which was released in September 2019. J.M. Redmann, in addition to writing other works and many short stories and the anthologies with Greg, is the multi-award-winning author of the Mickey Knight mystery series. Those of us who have followed queer fiction for a long time are real fans of Mickey Knight. The most recent one was Not Dead Enough, I think, book 10, which came out in November 2019. We got some youngsters here. Emily Smith, that's to make you laugh, writes medical romances, something close to my heart, as well as contemporary romances. Her most recent is Searching for Forever, and I will let them tell you about their upcoming books later on. Maggie Cummings writes contemporary romance series, the Bay West Social series, as well as several standalones, her most recent being Brooklyn Summer, just out, hot off the press in February 2020. Jean Copeland has written a wide range of both contemporary and historical, if one considers sadly the 1970s as historical, which as a point of fact they now are, romances. And most recently, in January 2020, has written a book with Jackie D, a romantic fantasy, Spellbound. So tonight's final topic, and what we've touched upon a fair amount throughout the sessions, because it's pretty hard not to, is writing during a pandemic. And it's pretty hard to talk about much of anything without talking about that. But this particular topic tonight, writing during what we're all experiencing, is a pretty personal thing. And I've asked the panelists to tell us what their lives outside of writing are like right now. Many of them, in this panel in particular, are actually not sheltering in place, but are working outside the home. And I didn't think we could really talk about writing without talking about everything else. So I'm going to start off with J.M. Redmann and ask, what's life like when you're not writing these days?
Oh boy. I have to confess, I am actually sheltering at home because I am too old and decrepit to come in with my young and vigorous Greg Herren. Greg, just FYI, Greg and I actually work at the same organization. I am the director of prevention, so I oversee a department of about 35 people. And the agency made the decision that anyone over 60, which alas, somehow that happened, is not going to be allowed to come in and have direct interaction with clients. I'm hoping that as we go along, that can change. So I had the real difficulty is suddenly what we were doing in my prevention area is we did a lot of HIV testing, STI testing, going out in the community, doing outreach and stuff, and suddenly COVID comes along and it's like, you can't do any of that. You have to stop right now. And so suddenly I've got some 30 people and who presumably need the jobs. And it's like, well, what do we do with these 30 people, and how do we make sure, how do we transition, how do we do it safely, what's fair, what's reasonable? I know a lot of people, Greg included, and he can talk more about this, have been the people who are screening as people come into our agency. So what we decided to do was we're focusing mainly on COVID. We're doing some other stuff, but anyone who comes to the agency is met outside in the garage in one place, in the first floor in the other place, and asked, do you have a cough? Do you have these symptoms? Do you have recent, all this sort of stuff? And anyone who says yes is going to be sent over for testing, because we are able to do a pretty extensive COVID testing. So that's good. So it's been, how do I make sure everyone's doing stuff? How do I make sure we're doing? How do I make sure that our funders are contacted? It's that really sort of making sure things happen. And I have to admit, the first couple of weeks were just a bit of a fog of, how do I focus on this? How do I do this? Figuring out, probably more email and online meetings than I ever have had in my life. I think at some point, I started looking and realizing that the battery on my computer, my phone, and my iPad was all run down by the end of the day.
I can understand exactly what you're saying. Suddenly you have all of this work that still needs to be done and people who need to be taken care of. And you have to find a totally different way of doing it in a day, which is what a lot of us ended up doing.
Yeah.
As you may have surmised in the audience, JM and Greg work together. Greg, what's it like for you? You are going in, is that right?
That's correct. I am fortunately, I am not too old to go to work yet. Getting very close, but it's been a weird shift, because my job, Jean was very gracious not to say this, but she's my supervisor's boss. So I'm like 2 tiers down from Jean. But
as you should be.
As I should be. And so my job was primarily testing people for HIV, syphilis, and hepatitis C. And so I had a lot of day-to-day contact with individuals pretty much every day, all day. And now we weren't doing that anymore. And so now I do a few hours at home, because I have some data entry work that I can do and some other things that I can do from home. But most of my time is going to the office and basically being one of the screeners. I'm one of the people who's sitting at the entrance to the building, deciding whether we can let you into the pharmacy or let you in to have your blood work done, or if you need to go get tested on the other side of the parking lot at the COVID tents. So it's been an adjustment, because I'm not used to working 9 to 5, basically. My schedule was, I usually work afternoons and early evenings. So getting up in the morning has been a challenge for me. It's nice though, because it feels like we're doing something and that we're helping people. And that's one of the best parts about our job, is that the whole purpose of our job is to help people and help them.
You can still do that.
And we can still do that. Yeah. And so I don't know how long this is going to go on. Obviously nobody does, but I really don't know. I feel really bad for the people who, I feel bad for the people who work in, like, we get a lot of people thanking us for what we're doing, and we're not doing anything remotely like the people are doing in the emergency rooms and so forth. And I feel like, because we really don't, I don't know, maybe I just always downplay myself and what I do and what I contribute to the world or something. I don't know, but I just feel like I wish we could do more than what we're doing, but hopefully that'll happen as more time passes.
I think people know what you're doing, Greg. Emily, You're in the middle of it.
I'm in the ER in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is basically part of Boston. And it's definitely a strange time. My day-to-day work life has changed quite a bit. I'm a physician assistant in the ER. I've been doing it for almost 4 years now. I work in a medium-sized sort of community hospital that's also a teaching hospital, and we get a fair amount of pretty sick people in the area, just because of the sort of population that we serve. And I think the biggest difference in my day-to-day life, I mean, obviously I'm still going to work. My hours are all over the place. It varies from week to week. Without going into a lot of detail about sort of what it's been like there, it's been strange. I will say it's been strange and scary because you don't know. I feel like I find myself checking the computer every day even when I'm not at work to see how many people are in the ICU today, how many people are in the ED, and I'm just waiting every day for that explosion. And I think that all of my colleagues are in the same boat, and that has been the most stressful part is you wake up every morning and you don't know what the day is going to look like, and it's scary. And when, you know, we just recently, as our cases have increased quite a bit, we are the way we're doing things is I think the way a lot of other hospitals are doing it in the ER is we have a tent outside the ED, so it's screening the well patients, the people who are well enough to walk to the hospital or drive up to the hospital in their car. They're getting screened by a triage nurse or a physician. They may or may not get tested depending on how many tests we have, which more often than not, we don't have enough. So they're being sent home unless they are sick enough that they need to come into the hospital. And then they make it through the doors to us. And these are often the people that have bad pneumonia that need to be admitted to the ICU. So that's what I'm seeing. I'm not seeing the well people. We're seeing the really sick people. So that's stressful and scary. And we just opened up the hot zone, which I hate that name because it's terrifying. And it's the segmented part of the ED where they stick us for 5-6 hours in our shift, where we're in full PPE with the respirators or the N95s and the gown, and you don't take anything off, and that's where all the COVID patients go. So every day is trial and error and doing something different. And I'm having plenty of Zoom meetings too, because we're not, aside from we're at work, we're not meeting. We're all doing everything virtually, but we're all still going in day to day. And it's weird and anxious, anxiety provoking, and yeah.
I'm getting a lot of comments coming through basically saying kudos to everyone. And I second that. And I think that the whole point of, talking about how life has changed is that it's hard to talk about how writing has changed without really getting a sense of everything else that's going on. Jean, how about you? You were teaching, right?
Yes, I'm
how has that changed?
Well, it's changed dramatically. I teach high school English, and we have moved to full distance learning, which has been a learning curve not only for the teachers, but also the students. And a lot of our students, as much as they complain, they loved the idea of having a place to go every day, of having a physical space where they could be with us and know that we're there for not only their academic needs, but also a lot of times for their emotional needs. And so projects in the Google Classroom, but it's been a huge adjustment for me, obviously, but for the teenagers that I teach, I found that I think it's been a bigger adjustment for them, because I forget how much they like just coming into school, not only being among their peers, but also being among the faculty, the teachers, the secretaries, the guidance counselors who have their backs. And I think that it's been quite an adjustment for them.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I've read the same thing, that it creates a sense of structure, that it's a social structure,
right.
that's normal for them. That's where they go.
Right.
And without that, I think everyone has lost a lot in
right.
the adjustments that we've had to make.
Right.
Maggie? What's happening with you?
I'm not sheltering in place either. I live in New York City or just outside New York City in Staten Island, which is one of the 5 boroughs that make up New York. And I work as a police officer in primarily in downtown Brooklyn, but also in Lower Manhattan. So it's, again, just being outside, dealing with the communities that we've always dealt with, but just kind of doing it in a whole new way. And every day is kind of a new learning curve.
So, everyone is basically asking, are you able to write? Are you able to get away from, these changes that everyone is experiencing and the particular stresses of your life? Is writing even on your radar these days? Jean, how about you?
For me, it's been a complete catch-22. Within the last couple of weeks, I actually signed a new contract with Bold Strokes Books for book
then you better
7.
be writing.
and so basically what it's like is like, I feel like I am a parent and a 5-year-old all in one. Because like on the one hand, I've signed this contract, I have this idea, I want to run with it. But then there's this other part of me that is so distracted and so disoriented with the way that life has become that I like the adult me has to, has to like push the child writer in me to say, okay, you signed this contract, you have this story, you were going to do it in the summer, but you have the time now, so sit your butt down and do some writing. And it's challenging because there are just so many other things right now that are clamoring for my attention. But on the other hand, it's also helped me focus a little more on my writing. So it's really a total dichotomy for me.
Jean, how about you? Do you have anything in the works? Or do you even think about it? Jean?
Writing, this thing you speak of. Actually, and I think Greg and I are in the same boat because we both agreed to do a Sherlock story, a pastiche for our friend Lindy Cameron, who's a publisher in Australia. And I said, okay, I started writing it, and I came up with this idea for a sort of fun, frivolous Mardi Gras story. And when the pandemic hit, the last thing I wanted to do was write a fun, frivolous Mardi Gras story. So I've had to really just sort of, put the proverbial shotgun to my head and sit down and say, just do 500 words, just do 1,000 words, just sit in and do this because you got to get it done by the end of the month. And so I've been doing that. I've also been, I think we think about writing as you're sitting in front of a computer and you're putting words on the page. But I think most of us know that that's not just all of writing. Writing is when the moment for that idea comes, when you start thinking about the book. And there's a whole sort of churning, at least for me, in the brain when I'm thinking about it. And so I've been thinking about the next Mickey Knight book, and I've come up with what do I want to write and how do I want to write it. And so for me, it's clearing away all the rest of the clutter. So I can actually sit down and do that because I've got to get the short story done because I promised I'd do it. It's got a deadline. The day job, which is in its weird sort of, this limbo space of I'm at home, I get up at a certain time, I sit in front of the computer for a certain number of hours, and then I have to, go in the kitchen, eat dinner, and then go back and sit in front of the computer. So it's really kind of hard. But one of the things I found in my refugee road trip after Katrina was getting beyond the fog and then saying, what can I control? What can I do? And the one thing I could do at that point was to continue writing the book that I'd already started to write and use it as a way to bear witness to what was going on.
After Katrina, you wrote something about that in one of the Mickey Knights. I think after.
Yeah, actually, it followed along. The book that I was writing, Death of a Dying Man, I was halfway through it when Katrina hit, and so I had to reconfigure the book because suddenly the New Orleans I was writing about did not exist. And so I just thought, well, what happened? Well, what happened to all my characters if they were going on doing this and then Katrina hit? And then I followed up with Watermark, which was in the immediate aftermath of Katrina. And again, those first couple books were really written about the New Orleans that I was living in and what we were all going through. And I know Greg has done the same thing, that we have these weirdly parallel lives, and we were both writing mysteries set in post-Katrina New Orleans.
Greg, are you writing now? Besides the short story that you're supposed to be writing with JM?
I actually finished mine this morning.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, I can't say it online in front of people, but you know the word that's coming to my mind.
It took me a while, though.
Good for you.
I mean, it's been I will say that since before the pandemic started, a bad writing day. I didn't write every day, but I tried to write at least 5 days a week, and usually I considered it a bad day if I didn't get more than 1,000 words.
Hmm.
I try to always get somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 a day. Before the pandemic started, I was doing a lot. I was doing some other I was writing some other thing, working on some other thing. I have too many things going on, reading too many books and short stories I'm working on right now. To focus.
You're one of those people that writes more than one thing at a time.
Yeah, I have like 2 novels in progress, 3 novels in progress.
He's bragging now.
A couple of novellas and about 14 short stories. And I finally forced myself this week to really focus on the Sherlock Holmes story. And this morning I was just sat down and just wrote 3,000 words and finished it. And I was like, wow, I didn't think I could do this anymore because I haven't since this all started. But I always worry that one of my fears is that I'm going to lose the ability to write. And after Katrina, I didn't really write any fiction for a while after Katrina. I had just finished a book and turned it in right 2 weeks before Katrina hit. And my next book, well, I guess it was 2 years later, but I kind of my publisher at the time kind of forced me to write my next book, which I didn't really want to write. And that was the one that won the Lammy. I didn't want to write it, and I won the Lammy. This is one time I won the Lammy. But writing for me always helps get me through things. I always use writing as a way to, I've always used writing and reading, for that matter, as a way to escape from things. It's going to be really, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It's like the pandemic fiction is going to be interesting to see who's going to write what and what they're going to write about. And I actually came up with a Scotty pandemic title, which is all Q's: quarter, quarantine, quadrille. But
all Q's.
But I don't know but I don't think I can write that right now. It's one of those, that was the thing with Katrina, is writing about Katrina it wasn't over.
Yeah.
You know, and that was hard to write about while the city was still being reconstructed and people were still coming back and people were still making the decision whether to come back, and some businesses were back and some businesses weren't, and we didn't know how it was all going to end up. Mm-hmm. So it felt kind of like the story wasn't complete yet. Mm-hmm. So to write about it without finishing the story without being able to finish the story seemed kind of weird, but I guess that's what we do. I mean, especially if you write a series and you're writing about characters, their story never ends. It just continues from book to book to book to book. And hopefully they learn and grow and stop making the same stupid mistakes. But I don't think mine ever will.
That is a perfect segue to Emily, because Emily, aren't you in the midst of writing a pandemic story that you started before this happened?
Yeah.
Where is that now?
So I always have said that I love virus movies. So like Outbreak and
Contagion.
The Hot Zone was like one of my favorite books, and Contagion. Yeah. And so when I finished my last manuscript, and then last fall, so it was like right after Women's Week, October, no one had even heard of COVID, well, as far as we know. So I was talking to my girlfriend, and I said, I want to do like a Doctors Without Borders kind of thing, something a little different, maybe like change the setting, take it out of the hospital. And then I thought, I love like pandemic movies. I'm going to write a pandemic book. So I came up with this plot about this flu-like illness that breaks out originally it was actually in Japan, but Sandy said that maybe I should move it to the U.S., so I moved it to Louisiana. The parallels. Right, sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I picked New Orleans. Totally random. It was
Dolls are after you.
totally. The parallels were really eerie, and I'm about 15,000 words in and stopped writing it a month ago. More than that. It's been a couple months. Partially because my coffee shop that I write in closed, obviously, so feel all out of my element. And also, it's like I mentioned this in the panel a couple days ago that I was on, but I'm scared to write it because I'm afraid. I was thinking about this the other day. I don't want my real life to seep too much into this, and I don't want, Sandy had said to me when I brought it up to her several months ago, she said, just make sure it's a romance with the background of a pandemic and not a story about a pandemic. And my fear is right now that if I go back to writing it, which I'm planning on doing and was going to do today, but I put it off again, is that it's going to be too much of a pandemic. It's going to be too scary. It's going to be too real. And I don't want that to detract from the romance, which is what we write and what I like to write. So I need to be really careful with that balance, and also pay attention to my own mental health when I'm doing it. Like, is this going to be therapeutic or is this going to be detrimental? And I don't know. So I really like what I've written so far, so I'm excited about it from that perspective, and I'm a little mad that this, that this happened, and one more thing that COVID has taken away. But I don't plan on giving it up. So because of that, I have a work that's coming out in July, and called First Do No Harm, and that was already finished and ready to go to the to have the proofs done and everything, several months ago. So I've been working on that, but as far as like a finished anything that's in the works, that's all I have. So unless I would start something new, my option is to go back to that, and that's my plan. But it's going to be a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I think that a lot of things are getting put on hold. Any kind of writing, but Maggie, I heard this rumor that you write in your car. Is that true? Are you still doing that?
I do still do that sometimes, not all the time though. Sometimes I do write at like a table or a desk or anything, with a hard surface on it. I was when the pandemic sort of the news broke out, I was writing a Christmas novella, and it was due April 1st. And so all this news started coming in, and I was like, oh, I just wish that I wasn't writing something right now so I could really kind of focus on work and not worry about my deadline. But deadlines are, deadlines for a reason. And for me, I didn't want to ask for an extension because I was like, well, I don't really know when things are going to be normal again. But Christmas novellas or Christmas stories, I think the gist behind them is that you want them to be warm and fuzzy and feel good and happily ever after, and to sort of go from working, my shift, out in the street where all this kind of craziness was going on and uncertainty, to then coming home and trying to sort of get my head into that space to really create a believable, to get the tone right. Because my tone was so off that it was difficult for me to sort of make that transition. And so where I was kind of like wishing I didn't have the deadline, it ended up actually becoming a place that was kind of safe and fun and an escape from reality in a way. So I was sort of happy to have the deadline, like to have a story to kind of sink myself into, and to have a deadline, because if my deadline wasn't so close, I would have just pushed it off because it was only like weeks away. And I was like far enough into the story. I finished it, obviously. And now that I don't have a deadline, I'm kind of like, well, normally I would give myself a nice long break between projects, mostly because I'm lazy. And now I'm just kind of like, well, I'm sort of longing to have a place to sort of escape to that has like a scripted happily ever after that I can control. So that's kind of where I am right now.
I get that.
I think it's interesting that some readers have or listeners have commented that they wouldn't want to read anything very heavy right now. And that's certainly understandable. And as Emily was saying, sometimes it's hard to write about what you're in the midst of, especially if you're struggling with it, and to put it into a slightly different context. And, I think some people well, apparently Contagion and all those movies are really popular right now.
That's
So people
surprising.
they're watching them.
Yeah, that's surprising.
Yeah. Are you reading anything are you able to read, for example? I find it really difficult to read right now. For some reason, I don't know. I can write, but I just haven't been able to lose myself in a book. Have any of you experienced that? Jean, you're shaking your head.
Yeah, I cannot sustain my attention long enough to get into any reading. I have a couple of books that I've already started, and I just can't get myself focused enough to stay with it. The fact that I signed a contract has helped me a lot, because now I have something that forces me to write, but I have nothing forcing me right now to read. So it's very difficult for me to allow my head the space to be quiet and relaxed with everything that's going on. And so I just kind of focus, once I'm done with my teaching, the only other thing that I could really focus on is the writing that I have to do, because I know that eventually it has to be a full, complete project.
Emily, that's like Animal Farm over there at your place.
No, I'm really sorry. Too many pets in a very small apartment.
Are you able to escape? When you come home from work, get out of the ER, are you able to read? Does it help you relax, or is there anything that, do you knit?
So I'll be honest, we just got a new puppy, the one you probably just saw about a month ago, maybe. Because COVID puppy, it's a great idea. Apparently I'm not the only one that thought that. But pretty much between him and working, and I've started running, which is new. So I've been doing a lot of running. And I think that I really haven't been able to either have time for much else or focus on much else. And I actually did, when this first started, I intended to be a blog that was going to be sort of like a day-to-day, like real life journaling of what this is like being like on the front lines. And I wrote the first one, and it was very early on, and I stopped and never published it because I just didn't want to be that person that, was putting there, there's so much of that out there. But I thought, so maybe it would be good for me therapeutically to do that, but I haven't gone back to it. So, it's been tough. I haven't been doing a lot of reading, or writing, and I would really, I should.
Jean, how about you? Are you able to read? Does it help you, or is it just something on your horizon?
I'm sort of in the opposite boat, because at some point in my foolish life, I said yes to reading for contests, reading for various stuff. And so I have this huge pile of books that I really need to read. And what I'm reading now, which is it's very well done. It's well written. It's gotten a whole lot of, for a debut novel, it's gotten a whole lot of notice. But it's also told from the devolving point of people who turn into serial killers. And I'm like,
very relaxing.
So I read it and I'm like, you are disgusting people. I do not want to spend my spare time with you, no matter how well written you are. And so it's been a challenge, because I feel like I need to get through this book and then I can get on to some of the other books. And so I think one of the really good things about reading outside your comfort zone, reading books that are just sort of given to you in your inbox that you might not have chosen, is it really pushes you to read books that you would never have otherwise seen. And that's a good thing. At this particular moment, I just am like, I wish I hadn't said yes, but it'll all work out in the end. So yes, I'm trying to read. I'm trying to keep going with things. It's keeping hold on, again, to the things we can control. One of the things I have really forced myself to do is to exercise and to, get up and I have to walk, 2 lengths of my house. And I live in an old New Orleans shotgun that's 80 feet long every time I get up. And those sort of little things to keep going. And I will confess to this, and this is, don't tell anyone else. But my
except these 200 people that are listening
was watching reruns of Murder, She Wrote. Well, Angela Lansbury, okay? Angela.
Okay, I got it. Before I ask Greg, I forgot that my moderator duty was to ask if all of you are wearing pants right now.
Why, yes.
It depends on how you define pants.
See?
I'm
And there
wearing
have been some
sweatpants.
interesting answers. Greg, we already know that you write every other instant, so I don't know how you possibly have time to read anything, but you must, and I know that you read everything. Are you able to disconnect so that you can read?
The funniest thing is about this entire thing is that I have been resisting for years and years and years and years. I have resisted reading electronically. I have an iPad, I have iBooks, I have Kindle, I have all the apps, but I just don't want to read. I sit at a computer screen all day. I write at a computer screen. The last thing I want to do is use another screen to read.
Uh-huh.
But I gave in, and now I'm addicted to my Kindle app. But it was really difficult for me. I tried to read something new that I hadn't read before, and I was having difficulty getting into it. And so I just opened up my Kindle app and found like Mary Stewart's Backlist had been on sale on BookBub once for $1.99. So I had bought all of her books, and I decided, I bet you can reread something. And so I opened up The Moon Spinners, and I started rereading that, and went from that to This Rough Magic and Airs Above the Ground. And my brother Michael, and I've just been having the best time rereading Mary Stewart. And today I started rereading Scott Himes' Mysterious Skin. So I think that for me, rereading something, because it's sort of familiar, but it was so long ago when I read it that I don't completely, so it's sort of newish because I don't remember it completely.
It was a different time too.
Yeah, and so being able to reacquaint, Mary Stewart was amazing. I mean, it's like, she does not nearly get enough credit for how good she was.
I agree. Yeah.
Read Mary Stewart.
Maggie, how about you?
I'm having sort of, I would say, concentration issues reading, getting into something new. I found that I'm able to read like a short story or something with like a much shorter length. And that's something I can kind of focus on because it doesn't take a whole lot of time. But getting into like novels and things like that has been difficult. And I think it's almost like this, I'm having the same issue with television almost, is that I can't really watch like a movie because it doesn't hold my attention for like 2 hours. So I watch more like, almost like what I would consider segmented TV. I'll watch Chopped or something that has like, it's almost like a mini episode, like because it's segmented into 3 parts. Mm-hmm. If I only see one part of it, it's okay. And that holds my attention for shorter periods of time. But I mean, I'm always, I'm always looking for new things to read. And Greg brings up some good points. And I kind of took note that there's a lot of authors that I have, read before and whose works I have on my Kindle and things like that, that maybe if I went back and looked at some of them, it might kind of kickstart my reading more.
Here's a question of mine. Do any of you read your own books again or not? Oh, look at Greg. Greg, since, the shock and awe.
I prefer not to, because whenever I reread my own work, why did you say it that way? Ugh, why did you have them do this? Oh, you should have put more here. You should have done better here. You could have done better. I'm never satisfied. That's why I always have to turn it in and just be done with it, because I'll just keep rewriting it for the rest of my life. So I generally don't go back very often unless I absolutely have to. Like I'll go back and check things, like what was Scotty's aunt's name? I have to go back to the book and find it. But I was just actually thinking this morning that one of the manuscripts that I'm working on, I've been very worried about being similar to a previous book that I had written. And I kind of decided today, you need to go back and reread that old book just to make sure, because you don't really remember. I don't really remember some of the books that I've written, which is really scary to me. But I'm also getting older.
How many books have you written, Greg? You can't remember, I know, but it's a lot.
It's not as many as you. You've written quite a few. How many have you written, Rad?
60, 61, I think.
See, I think I haven't even gotten to 40 yet.
I can't
So-
remember some. I can remember the books I've written, but I can't always remember the character's name right away. I have to think about it for a little bit, especially if they're not in the series.
Yeah, I have trouble with the character names, especially.
Jean, how about you? Do you reread your own work?
The only book that I reread is The Revelation of Beatrice Darby, and I reread that every year because my boss asked me to teach it.
Huh.
Oh.
It's a coming of age historic fiction, and it came out in 2015. And right after it came out, my boss, I teach high school English, but in an alternative setting, and so my boss came to me and said, I would like you to teach that book. And so I'm like, oh, you mean the school's going to order 20 copies of it? All right. And so I teach it every year, and I reread it with my students, and like coming from my each new year of a new group of students, I get a fresher look at it because I get to see it from their perspective. And so I enjoy reading it every year. But that's the only book that I've ever reread of my own, and it's only because it's actually part of my high school curriculum.
That's very cool.
Yeah.
How about you, JM? You've got a whole lot of books in your backlist. Do you reread them other than fact finding?
Not a whole lot. I mean, I can sometimes dip into them because it's like you need to do reading and stuff like that. And but for the most part, no. And sometimes that's a little terrifying because I realized that when I wrote the first book, I was in my 30s and I no longer am. And, I wonder who was the person that wrote those books, and am I writing the same books, even though I'm writing the same characters. But no, it's once it's written and done, once the hard copy's out there, and you can't go back and like Greg says, you look at how many that's did I put in that paragraph that I really all those sins that we do, it just is painful to know that that's permanent, and there's nothing I can do about it.
Emily, have you looked at your backlist at all?
Yeah, well, I've read what is it? Three of them? Three of my books to my girlfriend at her request out loud, just because I don't know how it got started. But it was kind of fun to go back and do them and see it, because if I was just reading it myself, I would probably, do what you guys were all saying about, finding all these things you wish you'd changed and done differently. So it's fun to see it through somebody else's eyes, like for the first time. And I like being surprised by things that I thought, at the time, like, oh, I really thought that this scene was terrible, and actually I really like it now. Or, oh, I thought that this was a great idea, and it seems like I really wish I'd done something differently. So it's kind of fun to go back and see, your perspective on it after some time.
Yeah. Before I get to Maggie, just a reminder to the audience, the flash sale is now on, and there are titles from all of the folks here, as well as quite a number of other titles, so you can scan them while we find out if Maggie ever reads her backlist.
I have looked at some of my books. I've not ever read them cover to cover since writing them, but there are times when I will think, well, how did I do this? How did I accomplish getting this person's point across? And so I'll go back and look at something that I've done in the past. And I think I do it almost to make sure, because I get like fear of failure always, but particularly when writing a book, like, I'm not going to be able to accomplish this. And so I'll go back and look at something, a scene that I've written, and said, oh, well, I did it here. I was able to. So it's almost like a little like pep talk I give myself by just seeing that I have actually accomplished it once. But then in doing that, maybe I read a little further, whatever the case is, and I experience some of those things that the other authors are talking about as well. That's kind of like, oh, well, why would I do it this way, or why would I do it that way? But to me, it's also an opportunity for me to kind of learn and see like mistakes I've made in the past and how I can kind of grow and improve on them kind of going forward. Things that I might not like the way it sounded, or a way I chose to point of view. I use it with point of view a lot to see why I would have done something in someone's point of view in the past, and going forward, how I could maybe capitalize on point of view more effectively.
I don't think I've ever met an author who hasn't said that they've gone back and looked at their works and thought they should have written it differently. because I think every book we get better, right? We hope we get better.
Yes.
And we change
Yeah,
as
you learn.
individuals. We change as individuals, so the themes we write about, and the way we write about them has to change over time. Someone asked me in the chats if I would answer the question myself, and in my very brief answer is I used to read my early books a lot over and over again, but I didn't write them probably, every 4 or 5 years in the 80s or the 90s. Now I don't read them very much, except if I'm writing a series, I'll go back. And I have the same experience. I mean, sometimes I'll read something and say, oh, that is really a good paragraph, and I don't even remember writing it. Other times I'll say, well, oh boy, that was really a bad sentence, and why didn't I rewrite that? So I have,
Yeah.
both of those experiences, and more of the
I
second
always say,
one.
why didn't my editor catch that?
Hey.
Well, now, there's a question. Someone asked this question, and that was a perfect lead-in. You guys are so good. Someone asked, how do you know if you have a good editor? And everybody, and okay, there's
You
a
can
deer in
fire him.
headlights, like somebody's going, I'm not answering that question. But Greg can't stop laughing. But how do you feel about the editorial process? Is it something you like, you dislike, you're neutral about it? Maggie?
I love it. I mean, I think that one of the things that, and just kind of to reflect back on the previous question, I think that when I'm struggling in a current manuscript, I can look back at something I've written in the past, know it's gone through an editing process, kind of remember the tools that my editor has given me to sort of like address something, or a way to phrase something better, or perspective-wise how to tackle the issue better, and kind of learn and grow from that. I mean, I think that with each work, I mean, hopefully I get better and better, but it's not, I would never have improved at all without a great editor who helps me along the way and kind of teaches me the mistakes that I make, and kind of knows what my limitations are, my learning limitations. Like with each book, I feel like it's like, okay, well, you've done a better job at this problem you were having. Now try to tackle this one. And so with each product I put out, I feel like I grow a little bit more. And that's all credit to my editor, kind of knowing that you can't be like, okay, well, your first book is a hot mess. Do all these 50 things to fix it. But it's like kind of more of a stepping stone process to get me there.
All right. We got 3 minutes left. Jean, how about you? Jean Copeland?
For me, I mean, I have had the same editor for all of my books except for Spellbound. I had a different editor for that because that was a completely different genre. But I absolutely love it. I feel like they help me grow every single time. I've had Shelley Thrasher for all of my books except for Spellbound. And I just work so well with her, and she's just so helpful and so supportive that it's just such an amazing process. And, even though there are times when you have to negotiate a little bit here and there, it's just been an amazing thing. And I absolutely agree with Maggie. I just feel like I come out of it each experience, knowing a little bit more. And getting a little bit closer to being the author that I feel like I hope that I can be.
JM, how is it after all this time still being edited? Is it?
It's a good thing. We all need to be edited, and editors do make us better. My first 2 books, very small publisher, I'm not naming any names, but none that you would know of. They were not well edited, quite frankly. The editors didn't know what they were doing. And so it was really a revelation to me with my 3rd book. I was privileged to work with the poet Jill Balowski, who also worked with Audre Lorde. And I really learned what a good editor does, and helps you write a better book, that the editor is helping you write your book and to write the best book you can. The reason we were cackling earlier is that Greg is actually my editor right now. And, so I can fire him. But
that's why he was laughing.
That's why he was laughing. And it really is a symbiotic process. You really, your editor can be your best friend, even when they're painfully honest with you, especially when they're painfully honest with you.
Okay. All right. Emily, how about you?
I enjoy the editing process a lot, but I would definitely describe it as humbling. Every time I wait for an email back from Shelley, I sort of, fingers crossed, kind of wait to see what she's going to say. But I know, like, to see the progression of the first manuscript to what comes out on paper is always awesome. And the things that she can do with the garbage that I sometimes would give her is amazing. And, just to hear, like, I just, like, her feedback means so much to me. To, like, recently to get an email from her saying that she felt like this was the best manuscript she'd seen from me yet was just, like, after working with her for so many years, was really, like, it just meant the world to me to hear that. So I really like the editing process, from as scary as it can be sometimes. I really enjoy it.
So Greg, would you rather edit or be edited?
I would rather be edited, actually.
Oh, there you go.
I think editing is hard. Being an editor is very, very hard. I've greatly appreciated every editor I've ever worked with. I've learned something from every editor I've worked with. I don't approach it, and I've never approached it from an adversarial point of view. I know that ultimately an editor's job is to help you produce the best book that you possibly can, and an editor can see things that I don't see. And that's very important because I miss a lot. As any of my editors will attest to, I miss a lot. And it's hard. It's interesting. I like to challenge myself every time. I want every book to be better than the one that I wrote before. I don't ever want to be at a point in my career where my best work is behind me, because if I ever get to the point where I feel that way, I'll probably stop.
Yeah.
And so as long as I continue, and my editors challenge me to be better, and so I appreciate it, and it's always a lot of fun. And actually, they're not as hard on me as I think they should be, to be honest with you.
I think it's time to wrap it up. We're getting a lot of thank yous coming through the chats and through the Q&A. It's been a great session. All of you have been fabulous. It's been my honor to moderate you tonight and to do this last session for this weekend.
Thanks, Red.
There will be more in the future, so you'll be hearing from us. Thank you, everyone out there. We really appreciate it. We love you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Red.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you, Red.
Thanks,
Stay
Panelists.
well.
Thanks.
Okay.